If you want to forecast someone's cancer risk, heart disease risk, and how long they'll live, don't examine the number on their scale. Look at their waist circumference. Most people believe being slim means being healthy, that the scale tells the complete story, and that shedding weight requires starving yourself. But after nearly 15 years in emergency medicine, I've observed something that challenges everything we've been taught about weight and wellness. You can be slender, fit into small clothing, and still be metabolically obese, harboring dangerous inflammatory fat that triples your cancer risk. This isn't subcutaneous fat you can pinch. It's visceral fat concealed deep inside your body cavity, wrapped around your organs, secreting inflammatory molecules that fuel disease. The alarming part, the very first place this deadly fat accumulates isn't your belly, it's your tongue. Hi, I'm Dr. Bennett. I'm an emergency medicine physician, and after years of treating patients with metabolic disease, watching people struggle with persistent weight that won't budge despite extreme dieting, I've come to realize something uncomfortable. We've been measuring the wrong thing. The scale doesn't differentiate between healthy muscle and dangerous organ fat. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate exactly how to activate your body's natural fat-burning mechanism to eliminate visceral fat specifically, not just lose weight. We'll explore why visceral fat is so much more hazardous than the fat you can see in the mirror, how your body has a built-in furnace called brown fat that burns visceral fat when triggered, the particular foods that flip the metabolic switch to target inflammatory fat, the startling research showing thin individuals with hidden fat have 3 times the cancer risk, and most importantly, the precise eating protocol that shrinks your waist by 2 inches in 8 weeks without counting a single calorie. Quick favor, I receive messages from people who've watched several of my videos and didn't realize they weren't subscribed. Could you verify right now? It's free, takes 2 seconds, and it helps this channel reach more people like you who want real science-based health information. Let me begin by explaining something that will fundamentally change how you think about body fat and health. There are 2 completely distinct types of fat in your body, and they have opposing effects on your health. The fat you can see and pinch, the stuff on your arms, thighs, hips, that's called subcutaneous fat. It rests just beneath your skin. This fat is relatively harmless. It might affect how you appear in clothing, but it's not particularly dangerous metabolically. The fat you cannot see, visceral fat, is an entirely different matter. Visceral fat is packed inside your abdominal cavity surrounding your liver, pancreas, intestines, and other vital organs. Imagine your body like a FedEx shipping box. You're packing fragile items, so you fill the box with styrofoam packing peanuts. You can cram a lot of peanuts into a relatively slim box. From the outside, the box appears normal-sized, but when you open it, it's bursting with filler under pressure. That's precisely what happens with visceral fat. You can have a lean body, wear size small clothing, but be packed full of visceral fat inside. The box looks thin, but it's under metabolic pressure. Now here's what makes visceral fat so hazardous. Unlike subcutaneous fat, which mostly just stores energy, visceral fat is metabolically active. It essentially functions as an endocrine organ that secretes inflammatory molecules called cytokines. These inflammatory molecules circulate through your bloodstream, generating chronic systemic inflammation that damages blood vessels, disrupts insulin signaling, and establishes an environment where cancer flourishes. A landmark study from Cornell University and research institutions in Sweden monitored 3,000 women who were all normal weight or thin. None were overweight or obese by standard measurements. At the beginning of the study, researchers utilized DEXA scans to assess body composition, specifically examining how much visceral fat each woman carried despite their normal weight. They followed these women for 13 years, tracking who developed breast cancer. The findings were striking. Women with excess visceral fat, despite being slender, had a 3-fold increase in breast cancer risk compared to thin women without excess visceral fat, 3 times the risk. These women appeared identical in the mirror, wore the same size clothing, weighed roughly the same on the scale, but their internal fat composition determined their cancer risk. The mechanism involves the inflammatory molecules. Visceral fat doesn't simply sit there passively. It continuously releases inflammatory signals into your bloodstream. Consider inflammation like embers in a campfire. A few embers are fine, even necessary. But if you have a microscopic tumor, just a tiny cluster of abnormal cells that your immune system is keeping in check, and you pour inflammation on it, it's like pouring gasoline on those embers. The tumor receives the growth signals it needs to expand rapidly. But that's only part of the picture. Excess visceral fat isn't just connected to breast cancer. Research has linked high visceral fat to elevated risk of 14 other cancers, including colon, ovarian, lung, prostate, pancreatic, liver, and kidney cancer. The inflammation establishes a systemic environment that promotes cancer development throughout the body. Beyond cancer, visceral fat dramatically increases risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, stroke, dementia, and fatty liver disease. This is why waist circumference is a superior predictor of health outcomes than BMI or total body weight. Your waist circumference directly corresponds with how much visceral fat you're carrying. For women, a waist circumference above 35 inches signals excess visceral fat. For men, above 40 inches. But even below those thresholds, you want to minimize visceral fat as much as possible. Now, here's something that astounded me when I first discovered it, and it's going to transform how you think about weight gain. Where do you think is the first place you accumulate visceral fat when you start gaining weight? 90% of people say the belly, which seems logical because that's what you observe in the mirror. Wrong. The first place you build visceral fat is in your tongue. Your tongue can become fat. If you examine tongue anatomy, the tip is pure muscle, acrobatic and flexible. The middle third is robust muscle designed to move food around your mouth. But the back third of your tongue is normally marbled with fat like a ribeye steak. When you start accumulating excess visceral fat, even if you're slim everywhere else, one of the first places it deposits is in the back of your tongue, increasing that marbling. This was investigated in young, thin Swedish women. As they gained visceral fat, their tongues became heavier. Their bed partners noticed they suddenly started snoring. Why? Because when you sleep, your muscles relax. A fatty tongue relaxes back into your airway and obstructs breathing. Sleep apnea. Even slender people with excess visceral fat can develop it. And it's not just about airway diameter. It's about tongue fat blocking the passage. This illustrates how visceral fat conceals itself in places you'd never anticipate, causing problems you wouldn't associate with body composition. Now, your body actually has a built-in mechanism to burn visceral fat, and most people have absolutely no idea it exists. You have two types of fat tissue: white fat, which is the storage fat we've been discussing, and brown fat, which is metabolically active fat that burns energy to generate heat. Brown fat is termed brown because it's packed with mitochondria, the energy-producing organelles in cells. Mitochondria contain elevated concentrations of iron, and when iron oxidizes, it turns brown. Abundant mitochondria equals a brown color. Babies have plentiful brown fat to keep them warm. As we age, we lose most of it, but adults still retain small deposits, primarily around the neck, upper back, and between the shoulder blades. Here's what makes brown fat remarkable. When activated, those mitochondria fire up and burn calories to produce heat. And where does brown fat obtain the fuel to burn? From your white fat, specifically from visceral fat first. Brown fat preferentially draws energy from the most metabolically available fat, which is visceral fat. So when you activate brown fat, you're essentially switching on a furnace inside your body that consumes visceral fat for fuel. Think of brown fat like a space heater. When it's off, it just sits there. When you switch it on, it starts burning fuel to generate warmth. The question is, how do you activate it? Cold exposure is one approach. When you're subjected to cold, your brain releases hormones called epinephrine and norepinephrine. These stress hormones travel through your nerves and bind to receptors on brown fat cells called beta-3 adrenergic receptors. This triggers the brown fat mitochondria to begin burning fuel. Cold plunges, cold showers, sleeping in a cool room around 65 degrees. All of these activate brown fat, but not everyone wants to take ice baths. The exciting discovery is that specific foods can activate brown fat through identical pathways without the need for cold exposure. The mechanism operates like this. Brown fat activation involves several steps. First, something triggers the beta-3 adrenergic receptor. Then that activates a protein called uncoupling protein 1, or UCP1, which resides on the mitochondria. UCP1 essentially uncouples energy production from ATP synthesis, meaning instead of storing energy, the mitochondria burn it off as heat. Certain compounds in foods can activate these same pathways. The catechins in tea, particularly a compound called EGCG, activate brown fat. The omega-3 fatty acids in seafood activate brown fat. Specific polyphenols in various plant foods activate brown fat. When you consume these foods regularly, you're essentially keeping your internal furnace running, continuously burning visceral fat. A groundbreaking study from researchers in Asia recruited women between ages 35 and 65 who were overweight and had type 2 diabetes. They divided participants into two groups. One group consumed 4 cups of green tea daily for 8 weeks. The control group changed nothing. At the end of 8 weeks, the green tea group lost an average of 3.5 pounds of total body weight. But here's the critical finding. They lost almost 2 inches of waist circumference. 2 belt holes. That's substantial visceral fat reduction. The weight loss was modest, but the change in body composition was dramatic. They were specifically burning the hazardous fat. The study also measured metabolic markers. The green tea group had lower fasting blood glucose, lower blood pressure, and improved cholesterol profiles, all indicators of reduced visceral fat and improved metabolic health. Another study examined healthy women between 35 and 50. These women weren't diabetic, just had some excess weight. They consumed tea at breakfast, lunch, and in the afternoon for 8 weeks. The tea group lost 2 pounds and reduced their waist circumference by almost 1 inch. Again, the waist reduction exceeded what you'd anticipate from 2 pounds of weight loss, indicating targeted visceral fat burning. The mechanism is that the EGCG in green tea activates brown fat. The brown fat consumes visceral fat, and your waist diminishes as you lose that deep internal fat. Now let me share which specific foods are most powerful at activating this fat-burning system. So now that you understand how visceral fat operates and how brown fat can burn it, the question is, what can you actually eat? What are the precise foods and exact quantities? Let me provide you with the specific protocol based on the research and what I recommend to patients struggling with stubborn visceral fat. The foundation is tea, and not all teas are equivalent. Green tea is the most thoroughly studied. You want at least 3 cups daily, ideally 4. Use actual tea bags or loose leaf tea, not bottled tea from the store, which contains minimal active compounds and usually added sugar. Brew it correctly. Heat water to about 175 degrees, which is steaming but not quite boiling. If you boil water, let it cool for about 3 minutes. Steep for 3 to 5 minutes. The EGCG and catechins extract during steeping. Don't add dairy milk because the proteins bind to catechins and inhibit absorption. Black coffee is acceptable, or use plant-based milk like almond or oat milk if you need to lighten it. Add lemon if you prefer. The vitamin C actually helps preserve catechins. If you consume 4 cups of green tea daily consistently for 8 weeks, based on the research, you can anticipate losing 2 to 4 inches of waist circumference, even if total weight loss is modest. That's the power of targeted visceral fat reduction. Now, if green tea isn't your preference, there are alternatives. Matcha is even more potent than regular green tea. Matcha is made by grinding whole tea leaves into powder and blending the powder into water. With regular green tea, you steep the leaves and discard them, so you only obtain what dissolves into the water. With matcha, you consume the entire leaf, receiving all the EGCG, all the catechins, and all the fiber. It's significantly more concentrated. 1 cup of matcha is roughly equivalent to 3 cups of regular green tea in terms of active compounds. If you consume matcha, 1 to 2 cups daily is sufficient. Oolong tea is another alternative. Oolong is partially oxidized. Not as green as green tea, but not as dark as black tea. It still contains significant catechins and has been demonstrated to reduce waist circumference in research studies. You'll frequently encounter oolong tea at Chinese restaurants. It has a slightly oxidized, smooth flavor without the grassy taste of green tea. 3 to 4 cups daily provides comparable benefits to green tea. If you want to go further, try pu'er tea. Pu'er is a fermented black tea from southwest China. It's aged for extended periods, sometimes years, and develops a smoky, earthy flavor. The fermentation process generates beneficial bacteria, making it a probiotic tea. Pu'er contains catechins, but also supports gut health, which independently helps reduce visceral fat and inflammation. Studies indicate pu'er tea can shrink waist circumference comparably to green tea. 2 to 3 cups daily is effective. The second essential food category is seafood rich in omega-3 fatty acids. The research here is remarkable. A study from Iceland examined the effect of omega-3s on visceral fat and metabolism. They recruited overweight adults and had them consume salmon 3 times per week for 8 weeks, while following a modest calorie restriction. The salmon group lost up to 15 pounds over 8 weeks, 15 pounds in 2 months from incorporating salmon into a reasonable diet. The omega-3s in salmon activate brown fat, increase metabolic rate, and specifically target visceral fat for burning. A 5-ounce serving of salmon contains about 1,565 milligrams of marine omega-3 fatty acids, primarily EPA and DHA. But here's where it becomes fascinating. The same researchers tested what they considered a non-oily fish, cod. Cod is a white fish, not regarded as particularly high in omega-3s. A 5 oz serving of cod contains only 284 milligrams of omega-3s. That's less than 20% of what's in salmon. They had participants consume cod 3 times per week for 8 weeks with the same modest calorie restriction. The cod group lost 10 pounds over 8 weeks. 10 pounds from eating a fish with relatively modest omega-3 content. This reveals something crucial. You don't need massive quantities of omega-3s to activate brown fat and burn visceral fat. The cod amount, 284 mg per serving, is sufficient. This unlocks many more seafood alternatives. Let me translate that cod omega-3 level into other common seafoods. To obtain the equivalent of 1 serving of cod, you need 4 medium Gulf shrimp, 8 oysters, 1 forkful of mackerel, or half a piece of halibut the size of a deck of cards. Even whitefish, shellfish, and small quantities of oily fish provide enough omega-3s to trigger the metabolic benefits. The practical conclusion is, eat seafood at least 3 times per week, ideally 4. Mix it up. Salmon one day, shrimp another day, cod another day. Variety ensures you're obtaining different omega-3 profiles and other beneficial nutrients. The third component is time-restricted eating, and this is where you can amplify all the benefits from tea and seafood without altering what you eat, just when you eat it. Your metabolism operates in 2 modes. When you're eating and insulin is elevated, your body concentrates on storing energy, loading fuel into cells. When you're not eating and insulin is low, your metabolism transitions to burning stored fat for energy. Our bodies are wired this way. The longer you can extend the fasting period, when your body is in fat-burning mode, the more visceral fat you'll eliminate. Here's the simplest approach that anyone can implement. Stop eating after dinner. Let's say you finish dinner at 7 and put dishes away at 8. Don't consume anything after that. No snacks, no raiding the refrigerator, no dessert before bed. Close your eating window at 8. If you normally go to bed at 11 hours, you've just gained 3 hours of fat burning time before sleep. During sleep, you continue burning fat for another 8 hours if you sleep until 7 more hours. That's 11 hours total. When you wake up, don't immediately eat breakfast. Take a shower, get dressed, go for a walk, check email, whatever your morning routine is. Wait an extra hour before eating. Now you've extended the fasting window to 12 hours. 8 hours of sleep, plus 3 hours after dinner, plus 1 hour in the morning. You've spent half your day in fat-burning mode without doing anything extreme. If you want to progress further, skip breakfast entirely. Have your first meal at noon or 1. Now you're at 16 hours fasting, 8 hours eating. That's classic intermittent fasting. But you don't need to go that far. 12 to 14 hours is effective and sustainable for most people. A study comparing 12-hour time-restricted eating to normal eating patterns found that participants practicing 12-hour restriction lost more visceral fat specifically, even when total calorie intake was identical. The when matters as much as the what. Now here are my practical recommendations from 15 years of clinical experience for maximizing visceral fat loss while preserving muscle and feeling energized. Don't fear food. The traditional approach was to eat as little as possible, count every calorie, feel deprived and hungry. That's not sustainable, and it's not necessary. Concentrate on incorporating the beneficial foods, tea and seafood primarily, rather than restricting everything else. When you consistently consume green tea and omega-3 rich seafood, your appetite naturally regulates. You'll feel more satisfied, crave less sugar, and your body will preferentially burn visceral fat. Timing your eating window is essential. The 12 to 14 hour overnight fast gives your body extended fat burning time without feeling like you're starving. Most people don't eat between 8 at night and 7 in the morning anyway. You're simply formalizing what already occurs. The magic is extending it slightly by waiting an hour after waking before eating. That extra hour in the morning is surprisingly powerful for metabolic benefits. Measure progress accurately. Weigh yourself if you want, but that number doesn't convey what matters. Measure your waist circumference at your belly button level. Do this once per week, same day, same time before eating. Track that number. A reduction of 1 to 2 inches in 8 weeks indicates you're successfully burning visceral fat. Even if the scale doesn't shift dramatically, waist circumference tells the real story. Remember, you can lose visceral fat while maintaining or even gaining muscle, which means the scale might not change substantially, but your body composition and health are transforming. Cold exposure can accelerate results if you're willing. You don't need ice baths. Simply sleeping in a cooler room around 65 degrees instead of 72 activates brown fat. Your body has to work slightly harder to maintain temperature, which means brown fat fires up and burns more visceral fat. Some people take cool showers for the last 2 minutes of their shower. not freezing, just uncomfortably cool. That temperature shock triggers the stress hormones that activate brown fat. But this is optional. The tea and seafood protocol works without cold exposure. Combining foods creates synergy. Consuming green tea with a meal that contains seafood amplifies both effects. The catechins from tea and omega-3s from seafood activate brown fat through different pathways, creating an additive effect. A practical meal might be grilled salmon with vegetables and a cup of green tea. You're hitting multiple metabolic pathways simultaneously. Don't overlook other anti-inflammatory foods. While tea and seafood form the foundation, incorporating berries, leafy greens, olive oil, nuts, and spices like turmeric reduces systemic inflammation, which independently helps diminish visceral fat. Visceral fat thrives in an inflammatory environment. Reduce inflammation and visceral fat becomes easier to eliminate. The most significant error I observe is people obsessing over the scale and becoming discouraged when weight doesn't drop quickly. Remember, the scale measures bones, muscle, water, and all types of fat combined. You want substantial bones for bone density. You want considerable muscle for strength and metabolic health. You want adequate hydration. The only component you want to minimize is visceral fat, and the scale doesn't distinguish that. This is why waist circumference is so much more informative. You can lose 3 inches off your waist while only losing 5 pounds total, which means you burned significant visceral fat while maintaining or building muscle. That's the ideal outcome. Another mistake is believing you need to do everything perfectly. You don't need to consume 4 cups of green tea and eat salmon 3 times weekly, and do 16-hour fasts and take cold showers all at once. Start with one thing. Add green tea to your morning. Do that consistently for 2 weeks. Then incorporate seafood twice weekly. Build gradually. Sustainable transformation happens through small, consistent improvements, not dramatic overhauls that last 3 days. One more frequent error is assuming supplements can substitute for whole foods. You can purchase green tea extract capsules, omega-3 fish oil pills, fat-burning supplements. These have limited effectiveness compared to actual food. The catechins in brewed green tea come with hundreds of other beneficial compounds. The omega-3s in salmon come with protein, vitamin D, selenium, and other nutrients that function synergistically. Supplements provide isolated compounds without the supporting cast. Whole foods are always more powerful. Look, carrying excess visceral fat doesn't mean you're destined for disease, and eliminating it doesn't require extreme measures. The patients I see who successfully reduce visceral fat and transform their metabolic health aren't doing anything radical. They're drinking tea daily, consuming seafood a few times per week, and stopping eating a few hours before bed. Simple, sustainable habits that activate brown fat and shift metabolism toward burning inflammatory fat. Your body wants to be healthy. It has built-in systems to burn visceral fat. You simply need to activate those systems with the appropriate signals. Tea provides the catechins that flip the metabolic switch. Seafood provides the omega-3s that keep brown fat active. Time-restricted eating gives your body extended periods to burn stored fat. Combine these 3 strategies consistently for 8 weeks, and your waist circumference will decrease significantly, even if total weight loss is modest. That waist reduction represents visceral fat disappearing, inflammation decreasing, and disease risk plummeting. Here's what we've covered. Visceral fat is metabolically active inflammatory fat that triples cancer risk and drives chronic disease, even in thin people. The scale doesn't differentiate dangerous visceral fat from healthy muscle, which is why waist circumference is a more reliable health metric. Your body has brown fat that burns visceral fat when activated through cold exposure or specific foods. Green tea contains catechins that activate brown fat. 3 to 4 cups daily reduces waist circumference by 1 to 2 inches in 8 weeks. Seafood provides omega-3s that activate brown fat. 3 servings weekly of any seafood. Even low-fat options like cod or shrimp triggers visceral fat burning. Time-restricted eating, specifically a 12 to 14-hour overnight fast, extends fat burning time and accelerates visceral fat loss. Measuring waist circumference weekly tracks progress more accurately than the scale. You can lose significant visceral fat while preserving muscle, which means the scale might barely change, but your health transforms dramatically. Your metabolic health is not determined by your weight. It's determined by your body composition, and specifically by how much inflammatory visceral fat you're carrying. You have more control over that than you realize. If you found this helpful, please subscribe and give this video a like. It helps me reach more people like you who want real science-based information about transforming their health. I'll see you in the next one.